So we heard Amber, Medicine Creek, and so Jeff.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, and can you introduce yourself, who you're with?
Yep, Jeff Dowdy from Capital Analysis.
Okay, do we have Nick Mosley yet?
Yeah, Nick Mosley with Confidence Analytics Private Lab.
Okay, so we have the steering committee here, so we are good. Welcome to everybody else who has everybody on mute. We'll have Tara Lynn manage that, and there's a hand raising icon that you can push, and that should show up. Carlin, I don't know if that shows up on yours or Alyssa's as the presenter.
I believe it shows mine.
Okay, if it shows yours, then you can unmute the hand that's raised. Maybe that would be the easiest way to make sure that we have clarity in our presentation today.
Yep.
Okay. So I am going to hand this over to Jessica, surprise, to go through the agenda and take us through the rest of the morning. I'm going to go ahead and put myself back on mute and let Jessica.
Great. And it may help, guys, if everybody that okay, so we have a pretty
Hey, Jessica.
time on work session, and we should. Jessica.
Hey, Jessica.
That when we this presentation.
Hey, Jessica. Can you hear me?
And I'm going to mute myself.
I'm not sure if
Jessica. Okay, let me before we go on, let me just say, I mean, I was having trouble hearing Jessica. I saw a couple chats that other folks were, so it's not just me. So that's maybe we'll I don't know if her connection, how her connection is. It's freezing on my screen a little bit. So Jessica, if you might want to call in because you broke up quite a bit, or maybe yeah. Somebody just suggested maybe if you turn your camera off, then your bandwidth might get better and the sound might work better.
And also make sure that if you're calling in and you have your video on, to make sure that the audio is on your video capabilities is turned off as well, like the microphone. Because if you have both of them at the same time, that's where we're getting all the feedback. If you're calling in and your video / audio, if that makes sense.
Okay, in any case, we have the agenda up on the screen. And I think that while Jessica gets herself sorted out on the audio part of her connection, let me just make a pause here and see if there's anybody on the steering committee that wants to raise their hands, if they have any changes they want to see or any additions they want to make to the agenda.
I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay, I'm not either. Okay. In which case, I want to make sure Jessica's back on before we start. So Jessica, just if you're on the phone, can you just? I don't see a new call-in user. I want to give her a minute. But maybe while we're waiting, we can get the PT work group update. Brian, are there any graphics that are going to come up?
Yes, I have a presentation that I'm going to pull up, so I'm going to go ahead and try and share that.
Great. Chops are looking good, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, for those of you on the video phone, I've changed my facial hair up a little bit. I got a little bored and decided to make a Twitter poll on what to do with it. This is the outcome. So,
Curly.
okay, it doesn't look like I can share my content right now.
Do you want me to bring the ball down to you?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm not sure why it didn't work earlier.
You're getting lots of positive feedback on your facial hair, Ryan.
Thank you. Yeah, my the goal was Quint from Jaws. That was that was my goal, and it seems to be working minus a little bit of gray. So
You look identical to him. You could be a stand-in.
yep. Hopefully I don't meet the same end as he does or did.
1 second, you're so far down.
I am just so let me. I failed to mention, and I'm sorry about this. I just looking up the chats. Just wanted everyone to know that the Cannabis Observer is also recording this webinar.
Okay, let's see how this is going to work. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yes.
I can, and best not to ask everyone. It'll take
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I'm figuring out how I can, because I'm working on a second monitor here, so I'm just making sure that everything looks good on my end as far as rolling.
It looks good to
Okay,
me.
cool.
So
Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for coming today. I'm going to run through. We had the PT work group had 2 meetings since our last steering committee meeting. We had a meeting on March 31st and another meeting last Tuesday on April 14th. For both meetings, the entire group was present, which was really good to have, being with both of them being WebEx meetings. We also had Jessica Archer join us briefly from in the first meeting on the 31st. So my game plan here is I'm going to kind of roll through the highlights of the first 2 meetings and then really get into the meat of what I'm here to talk about today. So we started the March 31st work group meeting discussing our data mining exercise that we discussed at the last steering committee meeting, finalizing the wording for the distribution email, defined what the time frame was going to be for what time frame we want to see the samples from, data from. So that would be October 19th through March 20th. We also gave a response time that we wanted from the labs. We said we distributed the email on 4/1 and requested the results before our next work group meeting last Tuesday, the 14th. So as far as discussion during the meeting, so PT frequency was the next thing we talked about, and there came out of the discussion pertaining to the size of the study. As noted before in this FANOVA-like model that we're working from, the retail material is what we use as the source, so the true value of the PT material is unknown. Therefore, we need to use a group average and standard deviation to determine what constitutes acceptable and unacceptable results for the study. Generally, the more the merrier. There was a general consensus based on Kai's presentation in November and a lot of the group members at 7, which is roughly half of the current industry, is the minimum to allow for statistical outliers and have more robust numbers. Due to this, the PT model would preferably have to be done at a time or times convenient for all laboratories. Lab representatives agreed that winter was likely not a good time to do this due to transportation of material over the pass, whichever one the courier or couriers use. It was also mentioned that March, early April might not also be a good time due to the industry seeming to be very busy for the ramp up to April 20th. This prompted the question from me to the representatives from the laboratories, when do they normally schedule their PTs? And we got a pretty wide mix of answers. Some of the labs stated that they lump them together in short periods of time to just wipe them all out, while others sprinkle them throughout the year in order to spread the costs. It was mentioned that cannabis PTs are roughly 2 to 3 times more expensive than their equivalents. That's kind of in quotes. I'm doing air quotes here in the environmental market. One of the lab representatives also brought up the idea of running a trial study for us to help determine what best build the support structure for this PT program. Rationale being, again, for the system works. When we roll it out for implementation, we don't want to find out on the first PT that counts for accreditation that transportation of the material is insufficient to preserve the integrity of the study. And now the labs and other people involved have sunk sizable investments into a PT that has a risk of failure due to outside controls or due to matters outside of the control of the laboratories. The group was in consensus that this was an excellent idea, but we have to have buy-off from the steering committee and maximum participation from the labs, especially labs that are the furthest away from the host lab, which everyone agreed really needs to be a neutral site. The remainder of the meeting was spent constructing the survey that you have in front of you. I hope you've all got a chance to look through it. We believe that this survey answers our questions on frequency and to help us schedule both this trial study and then studies going forward, as well as getting interest from the labs that are not represented on the task force to be involved in this trial run. The group also agreed that we would really need a way of truly evaluating the study, not the actual analytical results, the primary objective of the trial, I want to emphasize, is not the actual analytical results that the labs receive from the PT. At this point, we adjourned and would dedicate time at our next meeting to wrapping up this grading sheet. And one of the participating labs has a vendor validation checklist that they use at their lab when they're evaluating vendors for consumables or standards or other materials. So when we reconvened on April 14th, we started by focusing briefly on the data mining. There were 5 labs that participated in the exercise, so roughly a third of the labs that are actively analyzing samples in the state. The results from each lab were kept anonymous to the work group. Basically, the responses were given to me. I entered them into a master spreadsheet and then replaced the names of each laboratory with Lab A, Lab B, Lab C. We're going to keep the master spreadsheet open on Box in case any more labs submit results in the future. I know that this was a difficult ask for the laboratories involved and those that unfortunately have not participated to this point, even under the best of circumstances. Myself and the work group are extremely appreciative of all the laboratories that participated. So the actual numbers, in a way, they confirmed a lot of our suspicions that the THC market is dominated by flower, making up roughly 64% of the entire samples that the labs are seeing. And 98.78% of that product is what was designated as THC dominant. However, the breakdown of the remaining commodities was not what me personally expected. Maybe some of the other lab participants would find these numbers more in line, but I expected edibles to be a little bit higher than what we received. We got about 6% of the total samples being edibles, and then hydrocarbon products were a little bit higher than I expected at 23%. This information will really be an excellent guide for guiding our recommendations going forward, particularly in regards to some of the lesser segments of the market. Okay, the rest of the meeting was spent with us collaborating on the grading sheet used by the laboratories for the trial study. We started with the vendor validation checklist I mentioned earlier, and we went through each of the line items and decided whether to leave it, remove it, or edit it to be more applicable. The group believes that sending this sheet out when the participating laboratories receive their results from this trial study would be appropriate and giving them a 1-month time frame. Similar to the data mining study, I would serve as the point of contact for the laboratories, and grading sheets would have the names of the laboratories removed prior to review by the work group to allow any comments and the scores to remain anonymous to the work group. We will go into more detail in a second on specifically what we'll have on the grading sheet. Excuse me. It was also noted that the possibility of a second modified grading sheet would be needed if other third-party support is needed to facilitate this, such as a third-party courier. Also, the involved agencies would likely need to have their own metrics that they are looking for out of this study. For example, how much of a hindrance it is to the host lab's normal day-to-day. This would be a collaborative discussion, and I believe that it's best served between agencies outside of the work group, because those on the work group might not have the authority to make those decisions. So, rounding it into trial study. Why is this necessary? So, as noted by many of the members of the work group, the PTs that currently exist in the market do not accurately represent analysis of cannabis, particularly one of the members said particularly hemp oil and also hemp flower, but a little bit less of an issue than hemp oil. My assumption would be to the concentration of THC in hemp oil is so minimal that you don't have to do whatever steps are needed to get that THC interferent out when you're analyzing oil, THC containing oil. PTs are the most critical part of accreditation, and in order for the PT to be that most critical part, it has to accurately represent the day-to-day analysis of whatever material that PT is trying to represent for whatever parameters that PT is trying to represent. So again, the goal of the study is to test the support system that provides the laboratories the best chances for success. Although technically it is going to be a potency in flower PT, that is by far not the primary metric of success in the study. And quite frankly, it's pretty far down the list of the actual results of cannabinoids in flower. I also, whoops, went too far. Sorry about that. One other thing I really want to make clear is we're not trying to enter into a contract with Finova. It's just unfortunately they're the only known provider of a cannabis PT and a true marijuana matrix that could fit this current role for the trial study. Hopefully, going forward, more companies would enter into this market and it would become a more competitive market, but unfortunately, that's just not the case right now. So, survey. So, like I said earlier, the survey in front of you is what the work group believed were questions that would maximize involvement from laboratories not represented on either the work group or the steering committee. And as I mentioned before, having maximum involvement only makes the study more robust for logistics of getting the study to the labs. For example, if the lab hosting is the Department of Ag Lab, how is J Burns and Treeline's results differ from the lab in Yakima based on the amount of time the PT material spent in transit? So we think that's really critical. So we looked back at Oregon's model, and in some communications I had previously had with Ty and Finova, they typically charge the labs directly for the PT. So as mentioned in Ty's presentation, which I may have been misrepresenting at times, saying that he uses the ORLAP lab, and that's not the case. What happens is he uses a participating lab to generate the study, then transfers custody to ORLAP for distribution and storage. We believe that using a participating lab in the study is highly bad optics. We believe that it needs to be independent to the study lab that hosts Ty to remove all possible conflicts of interest. The work group, the members of the work group that are the lab representatives have varying levels of how strongly they feel about it, ranging from, I agree that this is bad optics, but I want the study to be, both the trial study and long-term, to be what's most convenient for Ty, all the way to, I'm okay with this being the case for the trial study if we have no other option, but we cannot do this long-term because of the look of possible collusion between the laboratory hosting and the laboratory hosting and the producer of the PT material. So I'm going to come back to the grading sheet. Now, what we have is, the one we have officially is on Box. It is in our work group, work groups page. So like I said before, we used a vendor review form from one of the participating labs as our template. The purpose, so this will be distributed to the participating labs in the trial study once they receive their results. And then 1 month later, we'd ask that it's submitted to myself and then anonymized, I think that's a word, and then redistributed to the work group. Following items are the metrics that we are looking for that are going to be graded on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being unacceptable, 5 being excellent, as well as having another section rating the importance that the person doing the grading believes of that metric based on a scale of non-applicable, not important, important, very important. So the 7 items are quality of supplies, quality of services, the pricing, responsiveness to inquiries, delivery times, terms of invoices, and professionalism. There will be an average score of these 7 metrics that is compiled, and then there will also be space for comments to further explain a score. In the initial distribution of the study, or excuse me, of this grading sheet, it'll be mentioned that the work group would really prefer to be able to follow up with labs if necessary, so that if there's a wide discrepancy between 2 labs, where one lab gives quality of services a 1 and another lab gives them a 5, we really need to follow up and figure that out. Similar to the distribution that would very likely be done for me, so that the answers continue to remain anonymous to the entire work group. But we believe that's critical to being able to figure out possible discrepancies and build this model going forward. Because again, we really don't want to roll this out and have it count for accreditation and not have the problems that this study represents figured out. So the remaining challenges that we've identified so far is location, confirmation of a neutral site, as well as what are the exact items the host lab is going to be responsible for, regardless of who the host lab is. Next item, gaining maximum participation. So like I said, that is the intent of the survey. And hopefully with this study being a trial run, our intention is not for it at this point to count towards a current accreditation. It is just a test run to make sure that the in-state model we are trying to implement functions. The timetable, highly dependent on the choreography of overcoming both the listed challenges and any challenges we haven't outlined so far that maybe we haven't thought of. And then there's, of course, the COVID-19 elephant in the room that, we can't have someone come into the state to do this until after travel restrictions and recommendations are loosened. One other thing is we also would like to know from any of the agencies if there are any specific metrics that they believe we haven't covered yet. And we'll open that up here in a second, and I will take notes and bring that back to the work group, as well as it was also noted licensing is also a really critical piece of what exactly is this person's license going to be? What exact license is this person going to need? I personally think it's the difference. It's going to be a different license between the top trial run and the permanent model. But I also think that that's a conversation that belongs with the people that have the agencies that have that authority, and that it's not really something that we can hash out in the work group because we just don't have enough of the expertise throughout the entire work group to make sound decisions on that. So at that point, hopefully my audio didn't cut out and everything went well. Does anyone have any questions for me? And like I said, I'm going to start taking some notes here if there's any metrics that have come up that anyone that come up to anyone that haven't been outlined so far. And I will also stop sharing my screen once I figure out what screen the WebEx is on. There we go.
I had a quick question, and maybe this has already been covered, but have we considered the possibility of mixing these not at a testing lab site, but potentially a producer processor that has a license and enough facilities, potentially with a state representative there to ensure, that everything's on the up and up?
No, that actually that has not come up, but I think that's a really interesting idea. At least from my perspective, my thought is on that is because actually let me get back. Yeah, that we haven't really that hasn't come up, so that's maybe something we could discuss. But I think that's maybe something that needs to be covered by the agencies possibly, because there might be further licensing logistics that I don't know of, or other problems that I can't think of right now.
I mean, just first off, they would have to have a HPLC. I know some of them do, but probably not a lot of the producer processors have HPLCs, Andy.
Yeah, and I think another important aspect on top of that HPLC, even if they have the HPLC, they might not have any kind of potency method that would cover that, that would cover what we're looking for.
Well, Ryan, maybe you just take that thought back to the next PT work group meeting and hash it out and compare it against some of the ideas you guys have already discussed, and report back next month.
Yeah, like I said, that's a really good thought, and I'll definitely look into that, or we will definitely look into that. That's an interesting possibility that I think didn't come across our mind, just didn't seem to come across our minds. So thank you, Amber. It's a really interesting idea.
All right. Thanks, Ryan, for the great presentation. Hopefully you guys can all hear me okay this time. Next up on the agenda, we've got a potency work group update from Mike. I don't know if there's too much of an update to have for at this point, but Mike, if you could just share anything that's been happening with getting that work group going.
And this is Kendra. If I could just jump in real quick, I just wanted to acknowledge that there's a note in the chat regarding the suggestion this just came up. So I wanted to make sure that Ryan saw the note in the chat from Nick Mosley.
Yes, I saw that. Thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, sorry, I having a hard time figuring out where my mute button was. Yeah, no, that is an interesting thought, and we'll bring that back to the work group, and that could be an avenue for figuring out if a producer processor is a viable is a possible alternative.
Okay, any other last thoughts on Ryan's presentation?
Yeah, just really quick addition to that. Potentially, and maybe this is already part of the conversation as well, but potentially having a state representative from Department of Ag or LCB present, if it does have to occur at a lab, that might help reduce some of the optics as well. So just a thought if that needs to get set up that way.
That's a great thought, Amber. All right, well, let's go ahead and turn it over to Mike for an update on the potency work group.
I don't have you muted, Mike.
And Mike, we cannot hear you. I saw your chat asking. We cannot hear you.
Which call-in user are you? Sorry, I'm not clear on that one.
He probably doesn't know what call-in user he is.
It looks like to me he's calling user 7.
That's Jessica.
Let me see.
Jessica, try unmuting 5 and see if you can hear him.
Okay, I unmuted 5. Are you there?
Try 4.
Okay.
Mike, can you say something?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, he's 4. Okay, great.
Oh, sorry about that. I had to call in with my cell phone. The interface of WebEx plus remote control software wasn't working for me. I do not have an update on the potency group. We did not have a meeting as discussed. We really wanted DOH to be involved in the meeting, and they are otherwise occupied with a more critical matter. We did get a box set up so that we can start sharing documents, but nobody's really shared any documents either, so I don't have anything substantial to report.
Jessica, I think you're on mute if you were trying to help us transition to the next agenda item.
Let's see. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So our next agenda item, we wanted to get an update from Shelley on the Department of Health and participation on the metals and potency work group. And it may be a little soon for anything to change, but we just had this as kind of a standing agenda item from last month, not knowing how the world was going to look this month. So Shelley, do you want to give us a quick update?
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to say that I checked in with leadership yesterday and confirmed that Caroline West will be leading the heavy metals work group efforts on behalf of DOH. A couple items I wanted to clarify. When looking at the timeline, it looked like solicitation for industry members would begin in June, launching the work group in July. Considering the current COVID testing landscape and the limited capacity at this time at the lab, is that start date flexible if COVID testing volumes remain high, or do we have other options there?
This is Jess, and I'll just share my perspective. I think everything has to be kind of flexible right now because this health emergency really takes precedent over everything else. I don't know, how firm the legislature will be with the next legislative report that's due. I think we have to assume that they'll be fairly firm on that, but we do have, this time around, we have a little bit more of a buffer than we had last time. For one thing, we're hitting the ground running. The steering committee's already formed. We had to do a lot of startup kind of stuff last time around, so I think we have more time there. Plus, it's a longer time frame. So the next, I think the next report is due December of 2021. So we have more time. Okay. So I think we're in a better shape, and I think if the startup is delayed, if it has to be delayed, it has to be delayed, and I think that's my perspective. But I'd like to hear what other folks think, particularly the chair, Annette.
If we were to need to delay because the bill is the time is in statute, we would need to seek legislative guidance.
Okay, so I mean, at this time, we'll move forward with Caroline West, and I'll just stay in close communication with the steering committee and the chair if we see any issues arise from that.
That sounds great. And also just a reminder that, we can provide administrative support with all of the, the solicitation we've done a couple times through at this point. So, so we can continue to provide that support and, do that. We can still do the solicitation if you guys want, and then just wait to start up. It's kind of up to you how you'd like to run that work group.
Excellent. I'll offer that resource to Caroline and see if she wants to grab hold of that. I'm assuming probably would appreciate that support. So
yeah, that piece, the solicitation piece, actually takes a lot more time and energy than it appears from the other end.
Right.
So yeah.
So Jessica, I think what I'll do is connect her with you after this meeting, if that's okay.
Sure, that sounds good. Yep, that'd be great.
Great, thank you.
And let me just direct everybody. Let me direct everybody to a comment that Sarah put out there, that the report is December 2021, but the recommendations need to be ready by June 2021. So keep that in mind.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Okay, so we are into our public feedback section of the meeting. And I will turn it over to Tara Lynn, who has the ultimate power to mute and unmute people. And we can go ahead and get started on our public feedback session.
Thanks, Jessica. If you could raise your hand rather than having me unmute everybody, that'd be easier, and then I can open it up to you to speak. if you're not sure where your hand is, you can send me a chat message. Give it another minute-ish.
Tarlin, this is Annette. Yeah, we want to give folks a few minutes to find their way through the technology.
Yeah. There's quite a few people on the call, so I'm scrolling up and down, checking.
While we're sort of in this pause moment, Tarlin, can you just put the agenda back up? Or whoever has the screen.
Alyssa will, yeah. Let me hang on, go back to. There you go, Alyssa.
Any hands up?
No, and maybe I'm just thinking the people that called in wouldn't be able to raise their hands if they had any feedback.
Why don't you just unmute all the call-in users and so they can speak up if they.
All right, brace
Good
yourself
idea.
for any feedback.
You can mute 4 and 7 because that's Mike and Jessica.
Okay, unmute. Here it goes. Brace yourself. That's why I didn't do that. Okay.
Can you unmute one at a time, maybe user 2, and then we'll just see if they're if the caller 2 may not know who you are, but if you're speaking, we'll be able to hear you. If you have anything you want to say.
And I can hear your background feedback. So that was number 2. You should be able to see that it's you. Okay, and then
Time number 5, yeah.
5, yeah, 5. Okay.
Okay. Well, that has to have been the quickest meeting we've ever had. Less than an hour. All right. So our next, when's our next date? Our next steering committee date?
I believe it's May 24th, but I don't have my calendar in front of me.
Okay, that's a Sunday.
Okay. It's maybe someone who has a calendar can look.
Actually,
maybe
I'll
the
look at my
18th?
calendar.
I have May 18th. This is Ryan.
So do I. Okay, so May 18th, it's a Monday. Mount St. Helens anniversary. Okay, Mount St. Helens, 40 years ago. Wow. We may have to have a special moment for Mount St. Helens on that day. Okay. So from the steering committee, is there anyone who wants to raise their hands to bring anything forward for the good of the order? And if not, we will adjourn. Right. Anybody who has bingo on their desktop can mark dog barking. I do what I can to help the bingoites out there.
Right.
All right. Well, let me express my appreciation for everybody for sticking with us through this virtual world. I think it's a good alternative, and it helps us keep going. Really appreciate everything Department of Health is doing to help us through this COVID-19. So I'm sure the task force would like to acknowledge and extend appreciation to Department of Health for that. And thanks for all the folks on the phone who have joined us and have been kind of sticking with us throughout our journey here on the task force. All right, so with that, I think we are adjourned, and everybody have a great day. Enjoy your extra hour, and we will see you in a month.